Imagine it's 1991. You're flipping through glossy car magazines and every cover screams Corvette ZR1, the king of speed, GM's golden child. But hidden in the shadows, a rogue creation is being whispered about in muscle car circles. It's not on any Pontiac showroom posters. You can't test drive it. You have to know about it. And even then, you need to ask the right dealer. What they hand you isn't just a Firebird, it's a low-key assassin, a rare Firebird that obliterated the Corvette ZR1 in straight-line sprints and on winding tracks, a Firebird that came with Corvette parts under the hood and Ferrari-style brakes in some builds. This wasn't marketing hype, it was the SLP Firehawk, a raw, uncaged beast forged through a secret alliance between Pontiac and a performance renegade called Street Legal Performance, or SLP. Here's where it gets wild. GM had a golden rule: nothing upstages the Corvette. And yet, this Pontiac Firebird SLP broke that rule with a grin and a growl. It came with 400 pound-feet of torque, a 6-speed manual borrowed straight from the C4 Corvette, and Corvette-spec suspension and cooling gear. The Firehawk 1991 edition could blast to 60 miles per hour in under 5 seconds and clock a top speed north of 160 miles per hour. That's no rumor. That's Firehawk specs confirmed. Why haven't you heard of it? Because Pontiac never officially advertised it. The Firehawk wasn't even on most brochures. Only 25 were ever made, and each one had to be special ordered through select dealers. It was a GM dealer special car, one that Chevrolet would have preferred didn't exist. But it did, and it was glorious. This wasn't just another third-gen Firebird upgrade. It was a rebellion with headers. A forgotten Firebird that shoved the ZR1 aside and said, "Make room." And the craziest part? We're just getting warmed up. Because to understand how this Corvette killer came to be, we have to go back to Pontiac's long-standing sibling rivalry with Chevrolet, and to a man named Ed Hamburger, who decided the Firebird could be something far more dangerous. Origins: Pontiac versus Chevrolet and the rise of SLP. To understand how the Firehawk slipped past the Corvette's throne, you need to know the internal drama inside General Motors. Pontiac and Chevrolet were like rival brothers in the same house, sharing parts, platforms, and budgets, but always secretly trying to one-up each other. Pontiac had muscle car DNA in its blood. After all, it gave us the GTO, the Trans Am, and the Firebird formula. But GM made one thing crystal clear: the Corvette was untouchable. That didn't sit right with Pontiac's performance-minded crew. Enter Ed Hamburger, a man with Mopar roots, drag racing credentials, and zero interest in corporate rules. In the late 80s, Hamburger launched SLP Engineering with one mission: bring real horsepower to the street and do it in a way that even California's strict emissions rules couldn't touch. That's right, SLP stood for Street Legal Performance. At first, SLP focused on third-gen Camaros and Firebirds, offering emissions-compliant power upgrades that pushed the envelope without crossing legal lines. We're talking 50-state legal performance that still snapped necks. But Pontiac saw more. They wanted to build something that could finally challenge the Corvette, even if they had to do it in the shadows. That's when Pontiac approached SLP with a bold request. Could you build a Firebird that doesn't just look fast, but humiliates a Corvette ZR1 on its best day? The answer? The Firehawk. But here's the twist. This wouldn't be a factory car. Pontiac couldn't openly produce a Corvette killer, so instead, they created a stealth project. Customers would buy a regular Firebird formula, already a potent platform with the L98 350 V8, and then send it off to SLP for transformation. The result was a limited edition Firebird 1991 that never officially existed in GM's lineup, but carried the blessing of those brave enough to look the other way. It was a performance rebellion disguised as a dealership order. Only select Pontiac dealers were allowed to offer the Firehawk package, and you had to know what to ask for. The whole thing felt like a muscle car speakeasy, hidden in plain sight but packing serious heat. And when those Firehawks rolled out, they didn't just whisper rebellion. They screamed it through tuned exhausts, Corvette transmissions, and raw American V8 thunder. Next up, let's talk about what made these machines true monsters. Not in theory, but in nuts, bolts, and brutal horsepower. Technical deep dive. The monster beneath the hood. Now let's pop the hood, because this wasn't just badge engineering or fancy stripes. The 1991 to 1992 Pontiac Firehawk was an engineering statement that screamed in horsepower, torque, and attitude. Underneath that familiar Firebird formula body sat a Frankenstein's lab of performance parts, most of them sourced straight from GM's top-shelf bin, but then reimagined by SLP like a mad scientist tuning a street-legal war machine. At its heart was the legendary 5.7-liter L98 V8. But this wasn't your dad's Camaro motor. SLP cracked it open and replaced the internals with forged pistons, a balanced crank, custom camshaft, ported aluminum heads, and a specially designed intake manifold. The result? An official 360 horsepower, though many insiders whispered the real number was closer to 400 horsepower, easily enough to embarrass a stock Corvette ZR1 in a street pull. And here's where it gets spicy. The Firehawk came with something no other factory 350 Firebird ever offered. A 6-speed manual transmission pulled right out of a C4 Corvette. That meant you weren't just pushing muscle. You were shifting through gears like a Le Mans driver. Mated with a Dana 44 rear axle, aluminum drive shaft, and high-performance clutch, the Firehawk was built to launch hard and run fast. But it wasn't just about straight-line brawling. SLP went further. The Firehawk received Corvette-spec cooling systems, performance-tuned suspension, and beefier sway bars. Some even featured Ferrari-style brakes with cross-drilled rotors. Yes, on a Firebird. It could stop on a dime, corner like a race car, and blow past 160 miles per hour without breaking a sweat. That's Firehawk top speed, confirmed by both SLP and road testers at the time. And if you looked at it, you might have missed it. No flashy wings, no outrageous graphics. Most were painted red, but at least one, maybe two, were green. It still wore the humble Firebird badge, which only made it more dangerous. A Pontiac sleeper car in every sense. When car and driver tested it, they called it raw, unfiltered, and barely civilized. And that was exactly the point. This wasn't a car built to coddle. It was built to destroy anything that challenged it, especially that smug Corvette ZR1 parked next to it at the dealership. Ready to see what kind of legacy a car like this leaves behind when only 25 ever made it into the wild? Impact and legacy. The Firehawk's brief but blazing moment. So here's the million-dollar question. If the 1991 Firehawk was so powerful, so rare, and so ahead of its time, why didn't it take over the streets? The truth? It wasn't for everyone, and that was by design. Priced at over $40,000 in 1991 dollars, the Firehawk wasn't just expensive. It was in the same league as the ZR1 Corvette, and more than double the cost of a regular Trans Am GTA. For that price, buyers weren't getting leather seats, digital gauges, or smooth rides. They were getting brutality on four wheels, manual steering, a track-ready suspension that punished potholes, and an exhaust note that didn't care about your neighbors. Car and driver loved it for its rawness. Motor Week called it a throwback to the 60s factory drag cars, barely tamed for the street. But this wasn't nostalgia, it was rebellion. Pontiac didn't market the Firehawk. It was never part of a glossy campaign. You had to know about it, and more importantly, want it badly enough to jump through hoops. That exclusivity gave it a mythical aura among enthusiasts. To this day, only 25 Firehawk units were ever built in this first-generation run. Some sources say one of them was green. The rest, mostly red, quietly prowling the underground of American muscle. And yet, despite its limited numbers, the Firehawk changed everything. It proved that a Pontiac Firebird SLP could go head-to-head with GM's best, without permission and without compromise. It reminded the industry that Pontiac still had fire in its DNA, even as the performance era was crumbling under emissions and insurance pressures. In a way, the Firehawk's short-lived run made it even more legendary. It wasn't a corporate product. It was a GM dealer special car, built by renegades, sold under the radar, and remembered by the lucky few who ever touched the throttle. Today, the Firehawk collector value has skyrocketed. Auctions rarely see one, but when they do, Firehawk auction prices can rival even rare Shelby Mustangs. It's not just a car, it's a muscle car ghost, haunting forums, barn finds, and collector dreams. But if it was so great, why did it disappear so fast? Why you've never heard of it, the Corvette shadow and platform death. If the Firehawk had the power to outrun a Corvette, the guts to challenge GM's rules, and the rarity to make collectors drool, why did it vanish almost overnight? Simple. It never stood a chance against the forces working against it. By 1991, the third-gen Firebird platform was aging fast. Its wedge-shaped styling, while iconic, was showing its age. Sales were slipping. The Trans Am, once a symbol of 80s power, was starting to feel like yesterday's news. Meanwhile, the Corvette ZR1 was GM's pride and joy, marketed as a technological marvel, with a Lotus-designed engine and a press campaign that stretched from Detroit to Europe. The Firehawk? It was a whisper, a side project, a dealer-ordered Firebird sleeper that had to sneak its way into the world. And that price tag, over $40,000, meant buyers were essentially choosing between an officially endorsed Corvette or a Firebird that most dealerships didn't even stock. Unsurprisingly, most played it safe. Pontiac originally aimed to build 250 Firehawk units, but by the time the books closed, just 25 were delivered. That's right, 25. In the world of rare GM builds, that's practically mythical. Even worse, the Firehawk had no marketing support, no flashy TV ads, no magazine spreads, no Motor Trend Car of the Year consideration. It didn't even have a consistent listing in Pontiac's own brochures. To the average buyer, the Firehawk 1991 didn't exist, and for the few who knew, it was almost too late. Then came the final nail. The 1992 model year was the last for the third-gen Firebird. General Motors was prepping a new, sleeker fourth-generation F-body, and with it, a more sanitized version of the Firehawk would return. Still fast, still impressive, but no longer the outlaw it once was. The original Firehawk had already faded into obscurity, not because it failed, but because it flew too close to the sun. A Firebird that beat the Corvette was never going to be allowed to live long, not under GM's house rules. But even as it disappeared, the legend only grew. Among performance junkies and muscle car forums, the Firehawk versus ZR1 Corvette debate still sparks flame wars. Its legacy survives not in numbers, but in whispers, forums, and rare sightings at car meets where people ask, wait, is that the Firehawk? The Firehawk's roar lives on. So here we are, decades later, and the question still echoes in garages and late-night car meets. What was that thing? If you're lucky enough to stumble across one, parked at a vintage show or resting under a dust cover in someone's barn, the reaction is always the same: confusion, curiosity, and finally, shock, because most people still don't know this car ever existed. That's the magic of the Pontiac Firehawk 1991. It wasn't just a rare Firebird. It was a moment when engineers, tuners, and dealers defied corporate silence to build something that should have never been allowed. Something faster than the ZR1. Something raw, unapologetic, and outrageously fast. And it wasn't about luxury, it wasn't about comfort, it was about rebellion. It was a Firebird that beat the Corvette and vanished before it could take the throne. A Corvette killer hidden in the shadows. No marketing blitz. No trophies on showroom floors, just raw performance wrapped in Pontiac skin and delivered through whispered dealer networks. Collectors today don't just see a car, they see forbidden muscle car lore, a myth made real. With only 25 ever built, the Firehawk has become one of the rarest Firebirds ever made. Some still believe one or two prototypes were even faster than we know, featuring upgraded Firehawk engine specs, Ferrari-style brakes, and hidden mods that never made it to the build sheets. Every once in a while, one pops up at auction. When it does, Firehawk auction prices make headlines, not just for rarity, but for the story that comes with it. A story of Pontiac's final gasp of pure performance. A Firebird so raw and unfiltered, it left the ZR1 embarrassed and GM executives red-faced. And that roar, it's still out there, in garages, in collector circles, in the pages of old road test reviews with crumpled corners. The Firehawk collector value has become priceless. Not because of what it cost, but because of what it meant. In the end, the Firehawk wasn't just another limited edition Firebird. It was proof that sometimes the best cars aren't the ones they want you to remember. They're the ones they tried to make you forget.